I'll wait 1, 2 minutes and then in case Fiona arrives. 1, 2 minutes. Mm.
Releases. We'll be announcing also the evening arrangement.
I'm going to announce the market event right now after this one. And then they,
Yeah.
I mean, no. I think we can start. Yeah. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event on how are environmental defenders protected in the different regions. My name is Ulises Quero, and I lead the program of Business, Land, and Environment at the International Service for Human Rights. And on behalf of Geneva Roadmap, Justice, the University of Geneva, and the Geneva Environmental Network, we are very happy to have you here for those who are in person at the Palais des Nations, but also for those who are online following this event. In the last years, there has been a real momentum for the protection of environmental defenders, not only at the universal system, but also at regional level. From the adoption of the Escazú Agreement to the creation of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Environmental Defenders under the Aarhus Convention, and also on an increased amount of cases where the role of environmental defenders has been portrayed, we have seen that there is an increased focus for not only recognition, but also protection of environmental human rights defenders. This was also portrayed in the landmark resolution 4011 in 2019, when there was also recognition of the role of regional mechanisms in protecting environmental defenders. This year, it marks the 5th anniversary of this resolution. And despite all these developments and really great updates, we still see that environmental defenders are one of the most targeted groups of defenders around the world. There is no region right now where environmental defenders are not a target. Today, we have a very diverse panel representing different regions to talk about the different regional mechanisms, but also experiences from the ground. But before starting with our panel, I would like to first introduce a video by the Special Rapporteur on the right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment, who was recently appointed in March this year, with some opening remarks.
Hello, dear friends. Greetings from Mexico City. Thank you very much for the invitation to contribute to this very important conversation in order to understand and specifically advance effective measures for the protection of those who are protecting the environment. Unfortunately, environmental defenders are under attack in a lot of countries, pretty much in every region in the world. And while Latin America, as it has been documented, is the most dangerous region in the world, there are other regions as well where environmental defenders are under attack, but unfortunately, we do not have the data and documentation needed to understand the situation. In that sense, it is very important for national, regional, and international organizations to further understand and especially implement effective measures in order to protect those who are protecting the environment. In that sense, measures including access to information, access to participation, and access to justice are absolutely key to protect the environment in which those that are protecting the environment are working, but also to make sure that there is an important space where environmental defenders and everyone else who is defending the environment are working. Regional human rights systems have a key key role to help states in order to identify the context and effective measures that they can be implemented for the better protection of environmental defenders. That is one of the things that the Inter-American system has been advanced. For a few years, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has been documenting and describing the situation that human rights defenders are facing in the Americas, including those who protect the environment. Those reports and also the standards, measures, and recommendations that the Inter-American Commission has developed over the years are a key source of inspiration and also identification of measures that states should be complying with. Of course, one of the key elements that the Commission has used over the years after the request of environmental defenders or organizations that represent them is the precautionary measures. Precautionary measures are granted when there is a specific urgent threat to the right to life or integrity to a person or a community. And several times the Inter-American Commission has granted precautionary measures to protect people or communities that are threatened because of their work in defending the environment. These measures have been key also because the states have to implement them in coordination with those who are threatened. And this is a key element in order to identify and implement effective measures. Even with the best faith, if people that are harassed or threatened are not being consulted, participated in the measures in order to protect them, it is most likely that the measures are not going to be effective. Another key element that we should be having in mind is jurisprudence, for example, also from the Inter-American system. The Inter-American Court a few years ago, in the Aarhus Fernandez versus Honduras case, already concluded that it is part of the obligation of the state to protect those who are defending the environment and also to research and investigate effectively the threats that the people may have. This is that unfortunately Ms. Aarhus Fernandez was assassinated, and because of the lack of response and effective protection from the state that knew already about this threat and didn't implement effective measures. Standards and measures like this already exist and can be complementary to what already has the Escazú Agreement and the Aarhus Convention, especially in relation with the Escazú Agreement that has been ratified by some states, but it's still pending to be ratified by many other states in the Americas. The standards from the Inter-American Commission and the Inter-American Court are key because they are applied to all the regions, and in some situations also, like the protection of environmental defenders and specific measures to implement their protection, might be stronger in the decisions that the Inter-American Commission and the Court have developed. In that sense, and as we see, we have to collaborate and coordinate. Even with the strongest measures, there's no way that one specific system or authority will be enough to protect people. So in collaboration, we hope to continue and actually implement and enforce measures to effectively protect those who are defending the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Astrid, that, as you see, really put a little bit of context of where we are and also the importance of regional mechanisms, but also the complementarity aspect that we are looking forward to see among the different mechanisms. And she already mentioned two of those mechanisms who are already working on protecting environmental defenders. And I would like to now turn to these two mechanisms to hear a little bit of not only the work that they are doing, but also some updates that are right now being under development, and also to share some of the activities that are relevant for the discussion today. So I would like to first turn to Fiona Marshall, who is the legal officer and secretary to the Compliance Committee of the UNACE Aarhus Convention Secretariat, which, by the way, the state parties meeting is happening this week. So we are also very privileged that despite all these activities, you can join us. So Fiona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And actually, I'm delighted to be here to represent the Aarhus Convention Secretariat and also to welcome so many people in the room, including a number of parties to the Aarhus Convention who are indeed here in Geneva this week for the Working Group of the Parties Convention. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Aarhus Convention, it has been in force for now 24 years. It is a convention that has 47 parties, including 46 states and the EU. It is open globally to any UN member state, and in July 2023, Guinea-Bissau became the first state to join from Africa. So just to say that actually for those of you who are actually in Geneva representing a UN member state from other parts of the world, the Aarhus Convention is open to any UN member state to ratify. So the particular point that I'm going to talk about today is how the Aarhus Convention, in a very real way, is protecting environmental defenders. So the Aarhus Convention has three main pillars, which is access to information, public participation, access to justice. It also has a binding obligation in its Article 3.8 that requires each party to the convention to ensure that any person exercising their rights under the convention is not penalized, persecuted, or harassed in any way for their involvement. This is a binding obligation to ensure that environmental defenders are protected. The convention has established two mechanisms to protect environmental defenders. The first has been in existence since 2004. That's the Compliance Committee. The Compliance Committee can hear cases about any alleged non-compliance with the convention. This includes alleged persecution of environmental defenders. The Compliance Committee is a legal mechanism, so it takes time. In 2021, the meeting of the parties, very concerned at all the very disturbing reports about attacks and persecution of environmental defenders, established the world's first rapid response mechanism for environmental defenders. That was established in 2021. In June 2022, the parties elected their first special rapporteur on environmental defenders, who is Michel Forst. And he may be very well known to many of the people in the room because he used to be the special rapporteur on human rights defenders under the Human Rights Council. So he took up his mandate in June 2022. He received his first complaints to his mechanism in October 2022, and now he has been working for just over a year and a half. And we can see that there is an increasing number of complaints coming to him, which is both a good and bad thing. It's a good thing. It means that there is greater awareness growing of the mandate and the mechanism. The bad thing is that it also seems to show that there is increasing oppression of environmental defenders. The rapid response mechanism and Article 3.8 relates to persecution that is linked to an Aarhus party because the convention's obligations are on the parties. So in order for the special rapporteur to take up a case of alleged persecution against an environmental defender, the persecution will have either been carried out by a state entity or there is a clear link to that Aarhus party. So I say that because the rights under the convention are actually for any member of the public, no matter which country they are. But in order for the special rapporteur to take up a case, the persecution must be related to actions or lack of action by a state party to the convention, or it can be directly linked to that party. And one of the ways that that can be directly linked is that the obligation under Article 3.8 also includes acts of private actors, for example, companies, that the state knew about but has not taken the necessary measures to stop. So that is something that is part of the findings of the Compliance Committee and is also part of the mandate that establishes the Special Rapporteur. The Special Rapporteur, in terms of his working procedures, works very similarly to the other Special Rapporteurs under the Human Rights Council. He receives complaints, he investigates them, he writes a letter to the state, putting the allegations, giving them 60 days for their response. During that time, the letter is confidential. Once that 60 days expires, it goes up on his website together with any response received from the state. And based on the nature of the response and the seriousness of the allegations, he may then take further measures. And that is the kind of measures like press statements, attending trials, diplomatic representations with the state concerned, meetings with government, this type of thing. So this is the basic tools of the Special Rapporteur. He can also issue a protection measure, which he has done just once until now. But if he considers that it's necessary, he can also issue a protection measure with respect to the environmental defender. And the final point I would just say is who is an environmental defender for the purposes of Article 3.8 and the Special Rapporteur? It is any person who is exercising their rights under the Convention to protect the environment. So it is not limited to people who recognize themselves as environmental defenders in their job. It doesn't necessarily need to be someone who's working for an NGO. It can be anybody, an Indigenous person, a member of a local community, a journalist, a lawyer, a local politician, an unelected politician, not part of the state, but a member of the public who is trying to act to protect the environment. So the complaints form is on his website, on the convention's website. It's available at the moment in English, Russian, and French. If anybody has any questions about the mechanism, I would be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thanks for giving this overview. Sometimes like having this mapping of everything that can be done under a mechanism is really useful, but also to highlight the extraterritorial dimensions of the work of the Special Rapporteur. I think that's also really useful, especially for those countries in which there are companies from Europe that are operating, but they do not have a system that actually can protect environmental defenders. And I would also mention that at the beginning of this year, Michelle Forrest, the Special Rapporteur on Environmental Defenders, released a position paper on civil disobedience on environmental protest. I will really recommend you to have a look because it really analyzed quite thoroughly this issue, but also explaining what are the obligations that the state parties to the Aarhus Convention should take in order to protect the rights of peaceful assembly. So thank you so much, Fiona. And similarly, now we also have another mechanism in the Americas, the Escazú Agreement. And to talk about a little bit of some updates, developments of what's going on in the region, we have Barbara Studillo, who is a ecofeminist human rights defender herself from Chile, who has been really involved in the Escazú Agreement for several years now. And more recently, the most recent COP was held in Santiago de Chile. So looking forward to hear the updates and also what's going on, what's happening at the Escazú Agreement. She will present in Spanish, but we have our colleague Eleanor who will help with translation for everyone in the room and online. Barbara, you have the floor.
Somos defensoras del territorio, somos defensoras de la vida. Vengo desde Chile, donde comienza el mundo. Y en representación de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, donde está en riesgo la vida de muchas de mis compañeras, las cuales luchan por el derecho a un medio ambiente sostenible y sano. Ya no podemos seguir sosteniendo el sacrificio y el sobreconsumo infinito de un planeta finito. Los humedales no...
We are defenders of territory, we are defenders of life. I come from Chile, where the world begins. And on behalf of Latin America and the Caribbean, where the lives of many of my colleagues who fight for the right to a sustainable and healthy environment are at risk. We can no longer continue with this sacrifice and endless overconsumption of a finite planet.
Los humedales no son solo reservas de minerales, son ecosistemas que sustentan los modos de vida de pueblos y comunidades que cohabitan con una biodiversidad única en el mundo. Las falsas soluciones a la transición energética perpetuarán el extractivismo y ponen en peligro la vida
Debemos evitar el ecocidio, la pérdida de la biodiversidad, la destrucción de ecosistemas, agotamiento de recursos naturales, escasez hídrica, contaminación del agua o del aire, empobrecimiento de los suelos o desertificación, daños graves a la naturaleza de forma generalizada. A lo largo plazo, desde los territorios hacemos un llamado a la justicia.
Wetlands are not only mineral resources, they are ecosystems that support the livelihoods of peoples and communities that coexist with a biodiversity which is unique in the world. False solutions to the energy transition will perpetuate extractivism and endanger life. And we must avoid ecocide, the loss of biodiversity, destruction of ecosystems, depletion of natural resources, water scarcity, water or air pollution, soil impoverishment or desertification, serious damage to nature on a widespread or long-term basis. From the territories, we call for justice.
El Acuerdo de Escazú, una herramienta fundamental. El acuerdo es esencial para América Latina y el Caribe. Garantiza el acceso a la información, la participación pública y la justicia en asuntos ambientales. Adoptando en Costa Rica en el 2018, es el primer acuerdo en el mundo con disposiciones específicas para la protección de defensores ambientales. Hasta la fecha, ha sido firmado por 24 países y ratificado por 16.
The Escazú Agreement is essential for Latin America and the Caribbean. It guarantees access to information, public participation, and justice in environmental matters. Adopted in Costa Rica in 2018, it's the first agreement in the world with specific provisions for the protection of environmental defenders. To date, it's been signed by 24 countries and ratified by 16.
Principios rectores y derechos humanos. El acuerdo se basa en principios fundamentales de derechos humanos y gobernanza ambiental, permitiendo abordar la justicia climática desde una perspectiva de derechos humanos, como el derecho a un medio ambiente sano, al agua y la salud.
The agreement is based on fundamental principles of human rights and environmental governance, allowing climate justice to be addressed from a human rights perspective, such as the right to healthy environment, water, and health.
Un llamado a la ratificación. Instamos a los estados que aún no han ratificado el acuerdo a hacerlo dada su importancia para fortalecer la legislación ambiental y la gobernanza en la región.
We urge those states who have not yet ratified the agreement to do so, given its importance in strengthening environmental legislation and governance in the region.
Transversalización e intergeneracionalidad. El acuerdo promueve la inclusión de políticas ambientales y climáticas involucrando a diversos sectores de la sociedad, incluyendo mujeres, jóvenes, pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. Además, tiene un enfoque intergeneracional, asegurando un medio ambiente sano para las generaciones presentes y futuras.
The Escazú Agreement promotes the inclusion of environmental and climate policies involving diverse sectors of society, including women, youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities. And it also has an intergenerational approach, ensuring a healthy environment for present and future generations.
Brechas y programa de implementación. Para abordar las brechas de la implementación, la CEPAL ha lanzado una herramienta en línea, la página web del Comité de Apoyo a la Aplicación y el Cumplimiento del Acuerdo de Escazú, facilitando el monitoreo, la transparencia y la participación.
To address gaps in implementation of the agreement, CEPAL has launched an online tool, the website of the Committee to support the implementation and compliance of the Escazú Agreement, facilitating monitoring, transparency, and participation.
El Plan de Acción sobre Defensores de Derechos Humanos en Asuntos Ambientales fue aprobado durante la tercera conferencia de las partes COP3 del Acuerdo de Escazú, celebrada en abril del 2024 en Santiago de Chile. Este plan, con un plazo de ejecución de 6 años, se estructura en 4 ejes, como generación de conocimiento, reconocimiento, protección y entorno propicio, y fue elaborado con aportes de consulta pública y organismos internacionales.
A plan of action on human rights defenders in environmental matters was approved during the third COP, the Escazú Agreement, held in April of this year in Santiago, Chile. The plan is a 6-year plan. It's structured into 4 priority areas: knowledge generation, recognition, protection, and enabling environment. And it was drawn up with input from public consultations and input from international organizations.
Protocolo para defensores ambientales en Chile. Chile ha presentado un protocolo desarrollado por la Subsecretaría de Derechos Humanos para proteger a los defensores de derechos humanos y ambientales. Este protocolo incluye medidas de coordinación entre instituciones y contempla tantos casos constituidos de delito como aquellos que no lo son, estableciendo una mesa de coordinación interinstitucional.
Chile has introduced a protocol developed by the Under Secretariat for Human Rights to protect human rights and environmental defenders. The protocol includes coordination measures between institutions and covers criminal and non-criminal cases, establishing an interinstitutional approach.
Una herramienta para fortalecer la democracia ambiental. La tercera conferencia de las partes ha traído una agenda activa para la implementación del Acuerdo de Escazú, que representa una herramienta fundamental para fortalecer la democracia ambiental, promover el desarrollo sostenible y proteger los derechos humanos en América Latina y el Caribe.
The third Conference of Parties, COP3 in Chile, has been a real fillip for an active agenda in the implementation of the Escazú Agreement in Chile. It represents a fundamental tool for strengthening environmental democracy, promote sustainable development, and protect human rights in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Desde y con los territorios hacemos un llamado a la justicia y a la acción para proteger nuestro medio ambiente y a quienes lo defienden.
From and with the territories, we call for justice and action to protect our environment and those who defend it.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you so much for giving also the updates on the adoption of the action plan. In addition also to that decision that was taken in Santiago, there was also a decision on gender. So also, like, I will invite you to have a look to these 2 decisions because they are going to be relevant not only for the implementation of the Escazú Agreement, but also to really determine the different national action plans that state parties need to take on their way of the implementation. After hearing the updates for the 2 mechanisms, now I would like to turn to some experiences from different stakeholders, from different regions, also to give a little bit of perspective of what's happening in their context. And I would like to start first with Leah May Torres, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Environmental Concerns in the Philippines. Leah, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I am also from the Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders, or APNED. So we are a regional network of defenders working on environmental rights. And I would like to focus more on Southeast Asia, since this is the region that has an opportunity for a regional framework. So just to give an overview of what's happening in Southeast Asia in particular, while the region is one of the most biodiverse regions in Asia, it is also one of the hotspots to attacks on environmental defenders. According to Global Witness, there have been 318 killings of environmental defenders from 2012 to 2021, and that comprises of 18% of the global number. Now, the Philippines, a very small archipelagic country, has the highest number of killings with 270 environmental defenders killed. The Philippines has been consistently the country in Asia that has the highest number of killings in the past decade. So there are other types of attacks aside from killings. There are harassment, threats, intimidation, criminalization, arrests, enforced disappearances. And if you have had this news, just in the past days, there were 10 Cambodian youth activists that were convicted to 6 to 8 years in prison, so-called for conspiring against the government, but they were just exercising their right to freedom of expression and opinion. So these are just some of the examples. And aside from that, there have been a growing narrative of environmental defenders that they are anti-government, that they're anti-development, communist or terrorists, and calling them that have often been a precursor of further attacks. So with this, when we look at the national level, there are no laws in Southeast Asia that has particularly focused on human rights defenders. Actually, in all of Asia, there is only one country that has a law on human rights defenders, and this is Mongolia. So other countries have policy proposals, or particularly in the Philippines, there is a human rights defenders bill and an environmental defense bill, but until now it hasn't been legislated. So there are also lack of domestic remedies for environmental defenders or human rights defenders in general. And there's also a lack of preventive measures for these attacks. And this is quite worrying, especially with a growing number of killings and other attacks in these countries in Southeast Asia, where there are no other mechanisms that they can access. So with this, human rights or environmental defenders have also tried to access international human rights mechanisms. These include the special procedures and also the Universal Periodic Review and other human rights mechanisms of the UN, and also some accountability mechanisms of international financial institutions. But according to our networks and many environmental defenders, the main barrier to accessing international mechanisms is the lack of knowledge that these mechanisms do exist. And even if they do know that these are out there, it's difficult for them to access this based on the technicalities, the requirements, the tediousness of the process, and the very lack of capacity for them to do this, especially small organizations at the grassroots level. So with this, it has been a constant recommendation to have a regional agreement, just to have another layer of option when domestic mechanisms do not work. So this is where the ASEAN Environmental Rights Framework came about because the ASEAN wanted to follow through the ASEAN Declaration of Human Rights that was established in 2012. So the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or ICHR, has established a working group to make an environmental rights framework. That's what it was called then. But it started in 2022 and they wanted it finished this year. So it's just a 2-year process. So imagine the ESCASA agreement trying to do this in about 2 decades. The ASEAN wanted to do it in 2 years. So this, actually the 5th meeting just concluded yesterday. And I think on our part, for civil society organizations, we have found that there have been a couple of issues in this process. So first of all, in terms of content, there has been quite an opposition by some ICHR representatives within the working group to use the term indigenous people, mainly because this is a term that's not often, that is also not used in many ASEAN countries, despite all of them agreeing with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So many indigenous peoples organizations in Southeast Asia have spoken out about it because it's not just a matter of semantics using the term indigenous people, but the rights that come along with it, such as the free, prior, and informed consent, right to self-determination, among others. So it has been quite a struggle but it still continues to be a struggle to put in indigenous people, the term, inside the document, and as well as the acknowledgement of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in its preamble. And secondly, another concern is the use of environmental human rights defenders term. So again, there was quite an opposition to this, mainly because they're saying that the ASEAN does not use the term environmental human rights defenders. So despite all ASEAN countries being member states of the UN, and the UN having already at least 2 Human Rights Council resolutions and 2 UN General Assembly resolutions recognizing the role of environmental human rights defenders in upholding environmental rights, and despite the recognition that they are constantly under attack or their security situation have been worsening, these ASEAN member states, some ASEAN representatives do not want to use that term in the declaration. So in the public draft that you can access in the ASEAN website, you will see that they did not use the term. They say that people who promote or protect those who uphold environmental rights. So it's just a very long way of saying it. But somehow it, again, like the indigenous people's term, it somehow doesn't encompass the entirety of the situation and complexities involved in calling them environmental human rights defenders. So there have been movements to try to remove the entire provision, but as of now, it's still under discussion whether to keep the provision requiring the member states to do, not really requiring, but having certain responsibilities for member states to follow through for the protection of environmental defenders. And aside from these two substantial elements in the declaration, there is also an issue of the process. So there was only 1 month given for consultations since the release of the public draft until the submission of written input to the working group. So with that small time frame and without support for civil society participation, how can we ensure that the civil society or the environmental defenders themselves get their inputs included in this document? So for us, I think civil society organizations, we are still trying to figure out how do we make sure that we have a better document, or at least have our governments agree to have a declaration that is more ambitious and more robust, but then again, not really being limited to the ASEAN process to having a better mechanism or regional agreement in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. And also thank you for giving just these updates that are so recent. Just yesterday, it was finished, as you say, the consultation. So thank you so much for bringing what are the main issues of the declaration. I know that there are more, but I think those are the more substantive ones. And also the fight of trying to include language on human rights defenders, despite that last year we were celebrating 25 years of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. We're still fighting to include that term in many of the documents that are being negotiated right now. Now I would like to turn to Frederick Haffen, who is a Senior Policy Officer for Environmental Law and Democracy of the European Environmental Bureau, also to give us a little bit of perspective of what's going on in the region.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this important panel today. I work for the European Environmental Bureau. We're an organization, we're a network representing about 190 member organizations in the EU member states and beyond in the region. And I think there's a couple of trends that we're recognizing or that we're witnessing in Europe in recent years. In terms of negative trends, we see that in certain countries, and just to name a few, Georgia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also Hungary, there are laws being passed or being expressed directly targeting civil society organizations, directly targeting defenders, human rights and environmental defenders. And these developments are very concerning for us, considering that it's a sort of backsliding of protection that we have seen before. And that's also a trend where we see laws termed or labeled as foreign agent laws being applied to civil society organizations based on, for example, percentages of funding. If a percentage of funding for the organization comes from foreign sources, then you have to register yourself as a foreign agent. These developments are very concerning. However, we also see a second trend where in countries that believe themselves to be the sort of bastions of human rights and environmental progressiveness for the last couple of years, we see also very worrying developments of environmental defenders facing serious consequences for their peaceful actions. We've seen this in Germany, we've seen this in the United Kingdom, we've seen this in France, all countries that like to present themselves on the international stage of adhering to the highest levels of human rights protection. But when it comes to their own actions internally, we see all the sort of traditional things that you can think of in terms of trying to repress peaceful protests, mislabeling protesters as unpeaceful, and having carrying out a very heavy hand by police and other state forces on these. We also see that the Special Rapporteur Michel Forst is actually in the UK today to assist the trial there, to witness it, because of very worrying developments over there of a person who has to stand trial for conspiracy because they've attended an online Zoom call to organize a protest. These are developments that 5 or 10 years ago we would not have thought we would cross the news of in our region. But not to be entirely bleak, there's also a couple of positive developments, especially at the European Union level. We have some pieces of legislation that have passed, one on strategic lawsuits against public participation. And while obviously it's not as strong as we would have hoped for, there's an inkling of hope there that there will be possibilities for judges in the region to dismiss cases early if people and entities, state entities, private entities are trying to abuse the legal system to silence those who want to speak up. We've also seen legislation on corporate sustainable due diligence, which is a very broadly framed legislation, but can have some positive effects for environmental defenders down the line in the region, but also outside of it. We've seen positively the establishment of the rapid response mechanism under the Aarhus Convention, which gives a lot of our member organizations in countries a lot of hope because it allows for a strong voice to raise the issues and amplify when things go wrong. We also see that more and more in the discussion, the terms civil disobedience, which we've already heard being discussed here today as well, is back on the agenda. I put this on a positive development, although I'm not entirely confident that it really is. But the fact that it's being talked about allows us for spaces and discussion forums where maybe these sort of things can be legitimized, and there can be education in terms of what is the right to protest, the right to assembly, what is civil disobedience, and what is a non-violent and what is a violent criminal act. And on that, I also would like to emphasize again, refer to the paper from Michel Forst. A second sort of trend that I think for us in the region in Europe is always important to keep in mind is our role abroad through trade and diplomatic relationships that we have all over the world. There again, the region is slowly waking up to the facts that are happening all over, but it's very, very slow and it's not having the desired effect. To take an example in terms of mining of precious materials, we are trying to reform a lot of the energy systems in Europe towards renewable energy. There's demands on those, and while these developments are very positive overall for climate protection, there are externalities in terms of what the demand on lithium and other cobalt and other precious materials are. And there I use mining as an example because we see direct impact across all the regions in terms of the demand we produce in Europe. But the reason I'm using mining as well as an example because, and this brings me to the sort of needs that we identify in Europe, and I've written down 5 here, although you can classify them differently. I think number one is that we are realizing that we need to learn from other regions. These are problems that we are now facing very, very seriously, that other regions have faced for a very long time, that they're better organized to try to fight, and that they are better resourced in terms of knowledge and in terms of experience on how to use UN mandates, UN mechanisms, how to try to effectuate resolutions that we have talking here about today, 4011. So I think mining there is a great example because traditionally, while we've had mining in Europe, we've not had so many new projects coming up. But we see this all across the region now in Portugal, but also in Scandinavia, where environmental defenders are facing serious repression from state and also private entities. That's number one, learning from other regions. Number two, there's a real need for capacity building among civil society organizations. in terms of organizing ourselves better. And number three, there's an issue of personal identification. There's a lot of people who may not identify themselves as environmental defenders. They call themselves broadly activists. A lot of them are young people who want to protest. And number five, I think this is the most important point. And my last point is we need to work on losing our sort of collective European arrogance, thinking that these sort of issues, persecution, unreasonable incarceration, and so on, are issues that happen somewhere else, and that we don't really need to deal with. It's time to tidy up our own house and make sure we follow the values that we try to export externally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frederick, and for sharing what's happening in Europe. Sometimes, while this happens in the other regions, sometimes we do not look at what's going on here. And there is also, as you said, a lot that Europe can learn from other regions. So thanks for highlighting that. And now let's turn to Africa, where we have Rose Birgen, who will explain a little bit of what's going on there. She's a legal practitioner from Kenya. So Rose, without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you. This brings me to just painting a picture of the situation of environmental human rights defenders in Africa. Like other regions, the situation is that over the last decade, we have seen unprecedented levels of environmental degradation, natural disasters as a result of climate change, and as more and more developments are being implemented in the region, we are seeing a total disregard on land rights, environmental rights, and the right to free and prior informed consent in the region by business operators and also government. Looking at the trends that we are seeing, even with pushback coming from defenders, we are seeing a lot of lethal and non-lethal attacks. So lethal attacks in the form of death or killings, but then in terms of non-lethal attacks, we are seeing more and more criminalization. We're seeing people being their right to protest being restricted, and even in some cases or in some countries where that has been legislated, sort of also restricting, human rights defenders. While civil society has played a role in supporting environmental human rights defenders in the region by maybe providing building support, training environmental defenders on digital and physical security trainings, or giving emergency support, we're still seeing that there are still some gaps in the region. Of course, in the region, we have human rights protection mechanisms, we have legal instruments, we have institutions that are mandated to protect and promote human rights. So at the regional level, we have the Africa Court, we have the Africa Commission, we have the Children's Rights Committee, and then at the sub-regional level, we have the East Africa Court of Justice and the ECOWAS Court of Justice. So we have institutions that are mandated to protect and promote protect human rights. How they work, in a sense, they work in terms of communications procedures or reporting procedures. So when I talk about communication procedures, this comes in forms of complaints where if there is a human rights violations, a human rights defender can present that for it to be or litigate that before these institutions. But then there are challenges still, even with that, because we are seeing with the Africa Court, for example, we're seeing more and more African countries starting to put reservations in a sense that it inhibits or prevents individuals and NGOs, to be specific, from presenting human rights violations in these institutions. Besides that, we are seeing an institution like the Africa Commission, for instance, setting up special procedures or special mechanisms that can further enhance how they work. So you have the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights Defenders, you have working groups on extractive issues, because issues of business and human rights are something things that are, or thematic issues that are on the rise in the continent. And these are also just being effective in terms of, doing research on how the business is affecting human rights in the region. And while this is effective, we are seeing that there's still some gap. Recently, climate change is becoming a huge issue, but there is no working group mechanism that is mandated to look at such issues. But I think the flexibility that we are seeing currently is that we are seeing more different working groups taking up voluntarily some of these mandates to look at these issues. So you'll find that the working group on business extractive issues, looking at climate change issues also in a sense. I think one thing that is a challenge in the continent has been implementation. We are seeing good decisions coming from this court, precedent setting decisions, but then lack of implementation. And with decisions that are coming out from these institutions, it's left to the goodwill of the state parties to implement that. So this is something that is a huge gap. Enforcement is an issue. In the legal instruments, we are seeing there's a lack of, an enforcement mechanism. And so that also prevents or affects how implementation is done in an effective way. Currently, there are more discussions about having a regional instrument, an ESCAZU type of agreement within the region to look at environmental rights in a sense, environmental democracy, so access to justice, participation, and access to information, but also protection of environmental defenders. But that is still at a very early stage. One of the things that CSOs have been pushing in the continent is for the special rapporteur of human rights defenders to take upon to take lead on that and to see to it that the instrument is developed and sort of codified. So I would say that is the situation at the moment in the continent.
Thank you so much, Rose. And also, it seems that there is a momentum right now, and the fact that there are some conversations on creating a regional mechanism such as the ESCAZU agreement says a lot about the situation in Africa. And I would like to go quickly back to Latin America with Raquel Irigoyen, who is represents International Institute on Law and Society from Lima, Peru, to also give a little bit of a quick context of what's happening in the region.
Thank you very much for the invitation to the University of Geneva and to the organizers for this discussion. I would like to bring the point of view from indigenous people's rights and from the Latin America region. As you know, in Latin America, we have ratified many international instruments, the Inter-American Convention, the American Convention of Human Rights. Also, 15 countries have ratified the ILO Convention on Indigenous Rights, and also we have the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples from UN and the American System. And all of these tools provide corpus of indigenous rights to the territory, the environment, and so on. What is the problem? The problem is, as you see in those maps, indigenous peoples live in the Amazon, they live in the mountains, they live from the rivers, the lakes, and so on. And the problem is that even our countries have ratified all of those conventions. For instance, if you see the Amazon, it's full of petroleum blocks, and in the highland, full of mining concessions. Not one of them have been previously consulted. So that's the problem. If that's the source of the pollution, for instance, all of these mega projects, the mining projects, dry lakes, rivers, and the complete hydric systems. And of course, indigenous peoples organized to defend their territories, and the government persecute them, kill them, and so on. So the risk of indigenous peoples is because they defend their territories. And the origin of all of this is the violations of those rights. So what are the regional mechanisms to protect indigenous peoples who defend their territories? We have two systems. One is consolidated, it has more than 60 years, which is the Inter-American system, and the emergent system that is that was talking about our colleague, the Escazú Agreement. So within the Inter-American system, as you know, they have two organs, the Commission, the Inter-American Commission, and the Court. And the Inter-American Commission has granted many precautionary measures for defenders. Some of them have protected lives, others not. As you know, the very well-known case about Berto Cáceres in Honduras. And but still, though, there are many indigenous peoples, many communities that have precautionary measures, and we consider that they are helping people to be alive. And we have also the Inter-American Court. Up to now, in this the last 20 years, the Inter-American Court has released around 30, almost 40 judgments related to indigenous peoples. Many of these judgments are related to rights like the territory, environment, and so on. Especially, for instance, since Aguas Tigni in 2000 versus Nicaragua in 2001, that judgment granted the right to the territory, and that the governments cannot give concessions, forest concessions, for instance, without first ensuring the territory. Or the case of Saramacca versus Suriname in 2007 that clearly says that the government cannot give a concession, mining concession or a forest concession, without the previous consent of indigenous peoples. That judgment is for more than 10 years ago, or maybe 15. Also, we have the case of La Cajonja Tornesta Tierra versus Argentina in 2020, that recognizes the right for water, health, environment, and other social rights. So we have this corpus juris that is necessary to enforce. So the problem is that the Inter-American system is overloaded, and it takes like 20 years to have a judgment. So we don't need to start again from zero. So this is also a recommendation for this regional emerging system, the Escazú. We need to base on those standards, because if the governments wouldn't give a concession without the previous consent of indigenous peoples, without respecting their territorial rights, for sure the environment will be protected. On the contrary, if we don't base environmental efforts on indigenous rights, like the territorial rights, the previous consent, and so on, it won't be possible to protect the environment, and the whole planet and the whole humanity will be in danger. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raquel. And we are running out of time, so I unfortunately won't open for questions, but we are going to have a series of other events where we are going to go into detail of each of these regions, starting this evening with Europe and Central Asia. So you can find all the information in the website, so no worries. We will have time to also continue exchanging. So I will quickly move with Luciana da Silva, just to start giving some concluding remarks. She is the competent environmental evaluation authority of the Ministry of Environment of Guinea-Bissau. So please go ahead. She's going to do it in French, but then it will translate.
Ok, merci. Bon, juste avec concernant l'intervention de la Guinée-Bissau sur la protection des défenseurs de l'environnement. Bon, dans la mise en œuvre de la Convention d'Aarhus, on peut considérer les considérations suivantes. D'une part, il convient d'expliquer que le pays avance lentement, mais sûrement dans la mise en œuvre de la Convention. Et d'autre part, le pays ne connaît pas encore les grandes entreprises d'exploiter des ressources naturelles susceptibles de mettre en péril de manière significative l'équilibre écologique.
Okay, so well, thank you for having me. And concerning the implementation of the Aarhus Convention in Guinea-Bissau, first comment is that we're progressing slowly, but we are progressing. But also, we do not have very big companies which are directly impacting the resources and putting our environment in danger.
Bon, cependant, on observe ici et là des petites activités ayant un impact sur l'environnement et que les défenseurs de l'environnement dénoncent à travers des conférences de presse, des dénonciations sur les réseaux sociaux, les médias sociaux de marché, comme la construction d'un complexe arbitraire au centre-ville de Bissau. Bon, ça va être composé d'un centre commercial, une école, une clinique et un lieu de culte. Mais c'est une zone humide. Donc, les défenseurs de l'environnement ont manifesté et ils ont porté plainte contre l'entreprise qui allait construire cette milieu humide.
So even though we don't have huge enterprise, we do have a number of small specific activities. And here defenders are active. For example, they do press conference or on social networks. There's a case, for example, in the center of Bissau for the construction of a mall, basically for markets, but it's directly in a wetland. Thank you. Sorry, it directly affects a wetland. So they have issued some protests in one of the procedures.
Jusqu'à présent, nous n'avons pas pu observer un seul cas de violation grave contre les défenseurs environnementaux du pays. Et bon, dès que la liberté de manifestation et d'expression. En outre, il est intéressant de noter que les demandes et les plaintes concernant les questions environnementales sont souvent formulées par des communautés locales ou des associations de jeunes et des femmes résidant d'une localité particulière qui pensent que l'exploitation d'une certaine ressource pour la construction d'un projet pourrait compromettre leur qualité de vie, leur culture et leur coutume.
So as a government, we don't really witness serious human rights violation because there is a freedom of demonstration and expression. But we do see environmental complaints coming directly from local communities or from a youth organization or women organization who feel that some development projects are affecting the local resource.
Et puis, malgré les dispositifs réglementaires par rapport au secteur environnemental dans la Guinée-Bissau, le gouvernement, à travers le ministère de l'Environnement, Biodiversité et l'Action climatique, essaie d'intervenir à chaque fois que les défenseurs environnementaux présentent des préoccupations par rapport à une exploitation minière ou des autres ressources naturelles. Et à travers aussi les organisations internationales, avec partenariat avec le gouvernement, et aussi souvent de résoudre ces problèmes. Mais on a des manques de règlement par rapport à ce secteur.
So we do have a number of regulation, but probably there's still some regulation that needs to be improved. When we are facing these type of cases, as just described, the Ministry of Environment and Climate tries to intervene and try to see how there is a possibility to find a solution on these issues affecting resources. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Luciana. And I will turn quickly to close all this event to Martin Torbergsen, who is a Minister Consular of the Permanent Mission of Norway here in Geneva. And as mentioned, there was a resolution that was adopted in 2019, and Norway was the country who took the leadership on pushing for the adoption of this resolution, a landmark resolution on environmental human rights defenders. So we are very happy to have Norway here. So Martin, maybe for some closing remarks of today, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks for the organizers. I'm glad that you are pleased to have Norway here. Norway is also very pleased to be here. So thanks to all the participants and the contributors. Norway did hold the pen on the resolution in 2019, as we have done on other Human Rights Council and General Assembly resolutions on the work of human rights defenders, be it general or be it specific sometimes. We continue to do that, and we will continue to do that going forward as well. Some of you will know that next year, in the March session, we slowly preparing for another version of the resolution, probably substantively being tabled here in Geneva. Anyway, so thank you very much for all your contributions. I have, sorry also for coming a little bit late, but that's like during session. Just a few takeaways that I have been able to gather in my sort of head. I think it's super useful that these occasions are used to bring civil society and human rights defenders to the international multilateral arena that is Geneva and the Human Rights Council. I think you very much contribute to reminding the states of the important work that you do, and also the relevance of what we do at the council or in other multilateral arenas for the work that human rights defenders do much closer to the ground than we find ourselves most of the time. So I think this linkage between what is happening in the regions and in the countries is very necessary for representatives of countries working in Geneva or for that matter to be reminded. I was struck by some of the, obviously this cuts across regions, it cuts across countries. I think when Frederick referred diplomatically perhaps to Scandinavia, I think perhaps he might have Norway in mind. So I think there is little doubt that this is of relevance to all of us. And I'm struck also, and I can draw on that by Norway's experience as well, the intersectionality, if you will, on the many issues that have been brought up here, across generations, across the gender aspect is clearly very important. And the intersection between these issues of environmental human rights defenders and the work of indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples' rights, I think is something that is crucially important in many areas of the world. And once again, that includes Norway. That was a half-hearted, but heartfelt intent, an attempt to sum up what you have done during this brief hour. And I wish I could participate in more of the events that you have on your agenda for today, and I think the next couple of days as well. But I will just give you sort of well wishes on behalf of Norway and the important work that you're all doing, wherever you might be doing it, and keep holding the state's feet to the fire in whatever way you can. And clearly, I think some of the regional developments here are super interesting and important to pay attention to. And I think, once again, the fact that that regions may learn from one another across boundaries is very important. Little doubt that the region of Europe may sometimes have to step down from frameworks, while at the same time insisting on the work that we do as important globally speaking. Is that okay?
Thank you so much, Martin. And we will be looking forward to that resolution in March, but also I think that highlighting as well that this is a cross-regional problem, so requires also cross-regional solutions, cooperations. Each region is doing what they need to do in terms to protect environmental defenders. Now we need to enhance cooperation, collaboration, complementarity. And this is going to continue being in the agenda. So, and as you see, also there are going to be other activities and events. So we close here because of the interest of time. Thank you so much for staying longer. But I also would like to invite you right now, room 25, there is a side event organized by the Center for International Environmental Law on Carbon Markets. Might be interested also of you. And for the rest of the activities for this evening and tomorrow, again, have a look at the website. All the information is there.